Welcome to Pet Business Disruptors. I'm Clayton, and I'm here with Sam Muelas and Caroline Griffiths, and we're doing an extra episode between the two of them because I had Sam and Caroline in today, and Caroline was watching Sam and itching to get involved. So let's unleash the beast and let these two really get into it.
Yeah, I was just making a point about the pet food industry and, for example, raw food. And how is it possible that we have so much variety in terms of composition? So you've got your 80-10-10s, your 85-15s, you have your 50-50s, and you have such a wide variety. And everything is okay. Everything is complete and balanced. How can there be such a disparity? Same with kibble, by the way. How is there so big a disparity between compositions?
Absolutely, there is. So the complete and balanced guidelines are really fairly easy to tick. And once you tick the boxes to be able to use the word complete and balanced on your pet food, it almost doesn't matter as such the type of food. So whether it's made with fresh, made with cooked ingredients, whether it's highly extruded, whatever it might be, cold pressed, that side of it isn't the factor. It's about the chemistry of it, really. So the nutritional requirements, at least in the EU, which are very similar to the AFCO ones in America as well, or the rest of the world tends to use those. So they have, I don't know if you've ever seen them, have you looked at them, the nutrient requirements?
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, a few years ago, you used to be able to see them in a lot of detail. Now they're quite hazy. When you actually bring them up on your screen, they're almost a little bit fuzzy, which I find amazing. I don't know whether that's just something that's happened. I'm obviously a little bit skeptical there, but there we are. So you look at these and you'll see the nutrient requirements. Now they will have a minimum baseline. And I can talk about how they reach that if you want me to, but they will then have kind of, some of them have maximums. So the ones that have maximums tend to be the ones that would stay in the body. So be more the fat soluble ones are likely, but we won't go into the whole guideline, especially as they're not in front of people. But there's a big grey area between, okay? So as long as your food can meet those guidelines, okay, the nutrient requirement guidelines, and it has a certain amount of protein content in it for which is higher for puppies than adults, then you can call your food complete, okay, even if it's at the real low end of those and it just hits over the minimums.
This is the 4% meat and animal derivatives.
So what you essentially do, and this is why we talk about vegan dog food. Back in the day, we had vegan dog food. It just wasn't marketed as vegan. So we'd have dog foods in that, you remember them, that would just be soya based. Yeah. They were vegan dog food. 4%
meat and animal derivatives dog cereal based food is essential as a vegan food.
What they do is they have their protein content and then they add a premix, what's called a premix. So you can pretty much have any protein content as long as it hits the guidelines, and you can add your premix. Okay, so that will put in all the vitamins and minerals that aren't in the protein source. And so that's how they do it. So when you turn over your packet and you see it's got all, zinc and manganese and magnesium, and people think, oh, it's got all these lovely nutrients. To me, the higher they are, the less good the food was to begin with. So if they're high, you want to not be buying that food because it wasn't so good to begin with because they had to add lots of things. So that's essentially what they do, but dependent on the type of food. So let's take the fresh food industry, because that's something that you stock a lot of, and you will have seen, and you obviously have noticed the crazy differences. So you have historic raw food feeders who just DIY. Okay, so that food is just available. What's happening is you then got the commercial types that want to use the word complete because it makes commercial sense to them, because the Guardian wants to come and buy something they don't have to do anything with. So there's ways to call it complete. And trade legally, so it's legislation rather than law, but to trade and use the word complete, it has to meet the FDF guidelines. Now, They do that by either just adding a premix, so the same way the processed food would do, which we know certain brands do that. So that's one way to tick the box. Or they can do it by adding certain whole foods, having it assessed by somebody like myself, putting through a professional formulator, so you have the printouts and you know that certain foods have certain nutrients in them. And that is then classed as a justification sheet of it being complete and balanced. So that's another way they can do it. Now, when they trade and they call 80-10-10 complete, they're not fulfilling that legislation for trading, and it shouldn't be written on there. It should say complementary. But because most people, not most people, I'll take that back considerably, but a lot of people who set up raw food companies don't necessarily know about the industry. They see it very much like, oh, I'm just going to start this pet food subscription, a bit like what you were talking with the fresh as well. And they don't really understand what it is that's got to be on the packaging. And they just create this because 80-10-10, I mean, when I first started to raw feed in the 90s, there was no 80-10-10. No. You just fed what was right for your dog, and you got to know your dog. Yep. Like we get to know ourselves and we get to know our kids, and people have forgotten how to do that now. They don't want to get to know their dog necessarily. And it is quite scary, I think, sometimes to be feeding your dog and be like, wow, I'm responsible for the health of this individual. And you want to pass that buck because you're so busy and all the rest of it. So I can see how it's got to that stage. But 80-10-10 originated just because it was seen as the most normal for the amount of muscle meat, the amount of bone, and the amount of offal or organ meat. And that's all then in. And that is what you call it's complete in terms of the meat part of it. But it should never have got that label on it. And I feel quite strongly that in terms of the raw industry, there's people like you and I that are doing our best to educate the guardians and to make a difference in the raw world. And then you have that kind of thing happen and you think, well, we should be in this together.
Yeah, it's the Wild West. It's the Wild West. And it's an industry or a corner of the industry that we love and we think is best for our dogs, yet is tarnished with a lot of these brands and a lot of these bad actors who aren't really adhering to any guidelines, and the regulators are probably more keen on just getting the fees or
well, the regulators seem to be more bothered about the bacteria side of it and the hygiene side of the fresh food industry than they do the nutrition.
Maybe 1 or 2 cases of salmonella if you do you not like cook chicken breast in your house? Like like what are we talking about with salmonella or all these? Yeah, get on with it.
Yeah, I think that, the regulators I'm talking about there are DEFRA, I suppose, and they need to supposedly make sure that everything's safe, but they're not necessarily thinking of the guidelines, the nutrient guidelines.
What they're thinking about is actually processes in terms of like how the meat is brought in, where it's stored, how it's processed, like the hygiene regulations when it's being processed, whether or not the people who are doing it are wearing the right PPE, etc., rather than actually, like, because it does seem like the bit that matters, which is what actually comes out the other end, they have this very loose set of guidelines. And when it comes out the other end, it's sort of like, well, that ticks in boxes. But I mean, like, as a consumer, like, how the hell do you know what you're supposed to be feeding? I mean, in a sense, you're kind of like of a mind that you should feed a few different brands in the hope that your dog actually gets what it's supposed to get out of the food, because otherwise, if you're just, let's say, because this whole mantra where people would always be, it's like you buy that brand, that's it for life. That's a guaranteed way of actually making your dog ill.
Yeah,
and the consumer is very confused as a result of all this, because you have raw feeding vets, you have vegan vets, you have kibble vets, and they are all up here in terms of authority, and the consumer is just, they just don't know what they're doing, and people get really, really tribal in the pet food industry, and whenever it comes to like raw feeding or veganism or whatever, and it's a really bad form for the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, of course it is. Yeah, but they are all trying to adhere to the same guidelines. The difference, obviously, with whole foods and fresh foods, whether that's cooked or raw, is that that's, in a sense, we as human beings have overcomplicated everything, and we're trying to mimic nature in our processed foods, whereas nature's already given us the answers. So the answer really in terms of what to feed is, what is my dog able to absorb? And how is my dog able to function internally? And people don't know this necessarily because we don't even really get taught this about ourselves. So yeah, again, they're looking outside of themselves, but the nature has got the answer. So if we can learn what nature's taught us, I think that's the first start. That's the first start, which would involve insects. I would imagine that there will be some carnivorous beings out there that will be nibbling on insects. I mean, doesn't the guy in Lion King eat insects? Hakuna Matata guy.
I think if you think about it, like insects, let's say if you want to go historically, like it would have been part of the diet, right? Like, like if you think dogs would have been, let's say, the reason they do so well on bone and organ and that sort of stuff, because they are companions. They would have eaten, we would have taken the top cuts for ourselves and left them with the bones and the meat and the rest of the meat and the organs, etc. But also part of that would be the ability to eat and process insects effectively, which I don't think it's a massive step away to actually look at insects as a superfood for
perhaps
dogs.
not as the sole protein. It's the sole protein. The jury's way out for me. I have a real problem with it being a sole protein, and because I think again it moves away from where it should be. But as a superfood, as something which will add to their diet, I'll give you an example. This is obviously cross species, but we keep emus, and one thing emus need when they're growing up is insects. But they don't need many. They don't really like them that much. But if you don't give it to them, they get bandy-legged and they can sway. But then you give them it, they'll eat them until they're done. And now they're adults. They don't want no interest in insects. But if you think about it, there's certain things which just, like as things evolve, they would have eaten. And there's not dogs out there which are, let's say, insectivorous dogs. But as part of a balanced diet, I can see the benefits that would have gone into that from that, to be honest.
I want to very quickly touch back on the guidelines and the big elephant in the room, which in my opinion is sugar. We can maybe have the debate, and there is no debate in my opinion, whether a dog food should include cereals, shantan gum, natural flavors, wheat gluten, corn, whatever. But sugar in pet food surely shouldn't be in pet food. Yet a lot of companies adhere to the guidelines, yet they include sugar in pet food. I don't think those guidelines then are any good at all.
Agreed. Well, not just that, but it's not all about what's in the food and what's in the bowl. It's about how optimally the dog can utilize those nutrients. So for instance, at the moment, we have an issue, it's a very hidden one, although I did mention it slightly in my podcast, about calcium. So the only permitted way to add calcium into any processed pet food, so anything that basically doesn't have a bone matrix in it, so that would include lightly cooked as well, commercial ones, the only way to add it is to add calcium carbonate. Now, coupled with the fact that as an additive isn't a requirement for labeling, nobody knows that chalk is the calcium source in every single processed food. Every single one. Okay, and that is not bioavailable. It's very low bioavailability. Now, there is reasoning behind this, which I've looked into, and it includes some of the changes that were made around the mad cow disease time period. So there was reasoning behind them ending up with only that one, but I do think things like that need to be looked at again, because we're dealing with a calcium and phosphorus ratio that's balanced in the bowl and not in the dog. And that is a big problem for me. And I think possibly we're going to see that coming through in years to come.
But I think we've seen that as well, as if you look at some of the protein sources that there's being used in a lot of these kibbles and stuff, where they'll put 20% peas in, and they're doing that just to bump the protein levels up. But it's not bioavailable. It's not as bioavailable as meat. It obviously comes with niacin, which is problematic. And I think like this is a big problem. Is like when you're actually looking at what a dog would need, and you're saying it's balanced in the bowl. You're saying, well, it's got calcium, it's got loads of protein, wonderful. Now, if that's pea protein and chalk, that's not great, right? I mean, it's
it's not ideal, is it? Yeah.
But that's the problem. There needs to be more guidelines around this because it's like it's false advertising, really, is what it is.
It's because the companies behind these foods are huge conglomerate. You know, you've talked about Mars and Nestle. They're linked in with GlaxoSmithKline. They're huge global companies that are I don't know if you've ever posted this on yours, but it's like a pyramid of who owns which pet foods, and you're amazed when you get to the top. You know, that there's hardly any companies, and they're related to, you know, the medication we take if we've got a headache and things like this, and the candy bars so it's tough. Like, people like us have to have a voice. And I think that's the only way we're going to make a big difference for the dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you an example that another nutrition consultant and we came up with this kind of alternative FEDIAF guideline that was at least the figures worked, because you've got them based on calorie content or you've got them based on dry matter. Now, we're not massively clean on calories, which I won't go into now, but we're not.
Calories aren't displayed.
Calories not even being something we should be thinking about, because metabolically they're not even right. I mean, I can explain if you want, but they're not right. You need to read Metabolical, Dr. Robert Lustig. It's absolutely excellent. He's a really good pediatrician. Anyway, so we're not keen on calories, and in terms of determining how much nutrients to have per calorific value of food. So you use the dry matter basis, even when you're using a fresh food. Now, obviously, the energy density is completely different. So we came up with a calculation and converted the dry matter using our energy density calculation. So we had, if you like, a set of guidelines that could be used for the nutrient requirements of fresh food. So, because they are different when you have it in dry matter. So, and it isn't just about the water content. It's anyway. So we had this, and at the time, the CEO of UK Pet Food, who obviously have an affiliation with FEDIAF, was able to look at this and was keen to look at this with us. And we took it to the UK Pet Food meeting, and it was just shot down immediately. And it was like, wow. Okay, are you actually understanding what we're saying here? We're trying to help the industry here.
Have interest in these trade bodies?
Possibly.
And they are funding these.
I don't know that it even got that far, but yeah, possibly. It's just any change doesn't seem to be met with
as far as I'm aware, the president of FEDIAF it forms part of one of the biggest conglomerates in the pet food, one of the big three. She's the head of,
that would make sense, because it is a very closed situation economically.
Same with AFCO. Like, a lot of those people on the board of AFCO belong to the big three. So an argument, could be, hey,
it's quite biased.
Exactly. We are going to lobby and we're going to push our agenda, and so that basically we can get away with putting whatever we want in pet food. And that's just the way it's going to be.
Well, I think there was that scandal with DCM and grain-free diets that suddenly got brushed under the carpet as soon as Mars bought Origin.
Yeah.
I think
there's a lawsuit.
Vets will still
going.
Talk about it. Yeah, vets still talk about the grain-free. I mean, that was a study. I think it was... goodness. I want to say it was about 420 dogs. There may have been more, but it was a very small study that was never published that proclaimed this link between. But it wasn't just the fact that it was grain-free. It was what they were adding instead. The lectins and the phytic acid were affecting, and the taurine levels. So, yeah, there was possibly something to it if you really overdid it on feeding what they were using instead of the grain. Yeah. But it just went like wildfire across all vets to the point where, my little vet in North Devon is like, not keen if Foos is not having grain, and they'll say this. And you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, take a step back here.
How would you train vets better on nutrition? Because again, we can go to town into rice or wheat gluten or whatever, but the sugar thing is really egregious in my opinion. And to prescribe a cat food with sugar in it and give it to me to feed my cat it's just a non-starter.
Well, they're just not looking, are they?
Yeah, so exactly. So they're not even looking. How would you go on about changing that side of things? And this is not about veterinarians. I have nothing against veterinarians, about the veterinary industry.
They mean well.
No. Like, I mean, look, that's the thing is that I've said it before. There's a lot of great vets out there. And I just think that nutrition isn't their forte, generally speaking. And look, at the end of the day, it has to go through... It's going to, to change things in that regard. I think it has to start at veterinary colleges and it has to gradually proliferate through, because the problem is that if you're a vet, you're a busy person. And do you have time to scour through everything that's going on in terms of nutrition when you've got other priorities? And so I think it needs to come from the bottom up, that the new vets coming into the market are better educated on that. But how do you then get the veterinary colleges to change how they teach nutrition? I think it really does involve getting a hit in front of these nutrition. Yeah,
well, you have to change the funding, which again is very difficult to do, isn't it? Because they're very tied in with the funding. Or you have to say, okay, we're going to take this funding, but we're going to bring other aspects in as well. So it may be that there's clauses in the funding that they can't do that potentially. I don't know. But I mean, I know that the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society, to take one organisation as an example, they have tried to teach, and they can often go. Students often have what's it called when they have students have a group of the student union type.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they can often go to those talks, and they can be part of those events, but they don't get put on the curriculum.
The only thing is, I think the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society, it still doesn't have a huge traction, nationwide.
No, it hasn't necessarily yet. I think they're working on that, though.
Yeah,
I think they are.
I know they work.
I agree. It probably could have been. I don't know the ins and outs of it, so I can't speak for it. They're all lovely people, the ones I've met.
But I don't know if you've ever tried looking on their website for a raw feeding vet.
Pretty hard to do.
It's pretty hard. You've got a pretty big gap in the map a lot of the time, to be honest.
I think it's just not updated, because I know plenty that aren't even listed on there.
Yeah.
So it seems, and they have to join. So it's not like it's just a map. It's a map of people that have joined.
Right.
Yeah.
And what could we do to the consumer or with the consumer to educate them better on pet food? Is this a case, because you can't get really too technical, leucine amounts and amino acids and absorption rates, and I love talking about that stuff, but it's not hepatic glucokinase again. It's just not practical for the average punter. So is it a case of telling people, hey, how about something minimally processed as opposed to something heavily processed, explaining the difference between extrusion and fresh chicken you can buy from your local supermarket, maybe, and you can maybe have a shot at making or formulating your own dog food if you want to do that. If you want to buy a kibble, these are the sort of things to go for, which is what we say: high meat content, low carbohydrate. Keep it simple. Don't, because people get really technical, and we get really, I get really technical. But sometimes the consumer just wants, this is good, this is not so good. Sugar, not good. Freshly prepared, free range chicken, good. Boom.
No, I think the trouble is that you have to remember that the average customer is at best is medium information. And that's almost as dangerous as no information. So you kind of. You have to try and simplify things as much as possible. And I think we do get lost is that we just assume everybody has. Look, it's confusing for me, and I've been doing this my whole life. It's so then when to try and transfer that across to a customer and say, well, okay, you've got a senior dog, large breed, it's got, let's say, slight stomach. This is what you should feed your dog. It's getting that across, but actually. The problem is that obviously, you need to do, as a store, you need to do so much research at the moment to actually really sort of bear out what you should be selling your customer, because it's such a minefield.
I think it is understanding the different types of pet food. I mean, in general, when you're feeding fresh food, especially in its raw state, still with the bone matrix, you cover all life stages. You really do, because that's what nature did. You know, it wasn't silly.
I agree, but at the same time, it's also not how marketing works.
Agreed.
Do you know what I mean?
And that's what you were saying before, that really they're missing a trick by not having life stage foods. And
You do, because the trouble is that if I am a low information consumer and I'm walking into a store and I'm looking at the freezer section and it's just like different meats, and then I look at the kibble section and you've got a senior with glucosamine and all this sort of. What seems more appealing to you? Let's say you put yourself in the position of a low information buyer, like the Royal Canin. I've got a Dachshund, Royal Canin Dachshund. Wow, it's made for me.
Boom.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's made for me. Like, why would I buy any of this other crap?
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
And this is the thing: is that if we want people to use these foods, we have to market better. We can't just sort of let it sit in the freezer and go 80-10-10.
I don't think people make the association or they extrapolate things very well either. So if you have pancreatitis or diabetes, I'm not going to give you the same meal every single day that's in a bag, that's on a shelf. I'm never going to do that. So are you going to do that for a dog? You know, would you do that for a dog? I don't know.
I think it has to be relatable, doesn't it? It has to be relatable to what they're going through or what they know. Even if they know a limited amount of knowledge, it has to be relatable to what they know about human nutrition. And most people do know, like you say, that sugar isn't ideal. So, I'm a big fan of talking about, it works for most people if they were in the country at the time, the Jamie Oliver school dinners campaign. Most people were on Jamie's side. Very few people thought that it was great for the kids that the mum was poking sausage rolls through of trans fatty acids and processed pork through. So, you know, that kind of triggers something. I think deep down, we as human beings do have that innate knowledge that fresh is better, but there's so much marketing around processed food, and we have been led down that route for so long that it can be very scary for people to go, oh my God, I've got to be responsible now for what my dog's having to. And they immediately say, well, how do I know he's getting his vitamins? That's the classic one. You've probably heard it too. They forget about minerals, of course, which are just as important. But so my answer to that is when you feed meat with a bone content, something like an 80-10-10, forgetting the FEDIAF guidelines even, you would still need to add some bits and pieces to it. But not very much, because that has about 95% of what a dog actually needs if we're talking about vitamins and minerals.
You always get the chicken. You get the chicken. Just get all the proteins, Let's give the dog all the proteins as well.
Yeah.
So, and you can vary the proteins as well. So people worry that when they switch to a fresh food, they're suddenly not giving them everything they need. But actually, they're giving them pretty much everything they need without putting anything on it yet, so it's very easy to do. I think we just don't realize that because we're told that the shelf stable food has been created for us, so we don't need to worry.
But I think that's the thing though, isn't it? Is like it's good marketing and
great marketing,
and that's what we need to get around as an industry. If we care about animals, is we need to get around the marketing, and people need to up their game on this stuff because look, I mean, if I went into a Holland and Barrett's, and I wanted, they say I was, I used to play a lot of sport and I used to get really sore joints and I had slow recovery time as I got older. I used to buy L-glutamine for it, but I had to know what L-glutamine was. Otherwise, if I go into as a low information person going in, you're just going to buy something like Recover Quick or, sports recovery tonic or some shit, And that's going to be my go-to because you're going, wow, that looks great. And that could be like a bottle of sugar with some L-glutamine in it. Do you know what I mean? So
I think the consumer is going to get a lot more informed and the industry is going to have to move with the times. Because if you think about it, 30 years ago, the dog used to sleep outside. 20 years ago, the dog slept downstairs. Now my dog sleeps with me on the bed. That's a very different relationship from 30 years ago to now. My dog is my baby.
Does he give you kisses?
He does. I give him kisses as well. We give each other kisses. So, but that relationship and that childification of pets, like that comes with a whole host of different issues, and nutrition is one of the biggest ones, arguably the biggest one.
Yeah, and the rest of the world is catching up in that regard. I went to Paraguay in October, and I went into a pet store there, and just talking to the pet store owner about how the Paraguayan market, because you think about global South, that sort of stuff, but she was saying the pet trade's starting to boom, and it kind of reminded me from a pet store like in Ireland 20 years ago that they were starting to get higher quality kibbles in. They haven't got to that raw food stage or anything yet, but they're thinking more about it because they've stopped being utilities and started being pets.
Yeah.
They're not, know, and as that chain moves along, and I think everybody's moving in that direction.
They care more in a way.
Yeah.
They care more and they're noticing more.
They want more information. They want to know more. But again, when you transmit information, you have to do it in a way which isn't completely confusing. Yeah. And I think that's the problem at the moment. Everything's so confusing for normal people.
Yeah, they just
by
back
default.
away.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
I mean, I know you're a nutrition consultant, but
my job is to make it simple.
But people shouldn't have to visit a consultant just to be able to feed their dog properly.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you're in an extreme case, but a normal person with a dog that's pretty normal.
But we're so anxious as a race now. Humans are so anxious. They don't want to get it wrong. It's constantly, I don't want to get it wrong. How do I know if he's getting his vitamins? I don't want to get it wrong. And they don't realize how easy it is. And then a little bit of education and they're like, oh, okay, it's that simple. Okay. And then hopefully they'll have the confidence to carry that through.
And if the dog has been eating rubbish for the past 5 years and now the dog has started developing certain health issues, then you are likely deep in vet bills, right? And you've spent a couple grand, maybe more with the state of things. So of course you're going to find other people. Of course you're going to look into, alternative, more holistic, or, call it what you may, but you are going to look around. You're going to shop around. You're not going to follow the consensus because the consensus might have failed you after 5 years. So I think people are a lot more open and willing to listen to people like us.
Processed food is kind of killing itself off in that way. It's like not doing itself any favors by making the dogs poorly by putting sugar in it.
It's just crazy that we're in 2025 and that still happens. I mean,
I haven't seen many with actual sugar, though, to be fair. I don't know whether that's just your catch-all term. I mean, caramel is in quite a few, isn't it?
Caramel, sugar derivatives. Dextrose is in a lot of,
you're
like
right on
wet
that front.
foods, to make them more palatable. So, a lot of the low-quality cat foods contain sugar or sugar derivatives.
Yeah, cats get a rough deal. Okay. Cats really need more.
That recommended
exposure and
cereal-based cat foods. Okay.
And the problem is for cats is that cats are primarily grocery customers. Like as pest specialists, we don't get the volume of cat customers through because they are primarily grocery customers. Yep. So when people are buying grocery cat food, it's a real problem.
Yes.
Because getting that information to cat customers is hard. Like dog people are different. They tend to be more interested in pet specialists because the dog, I guess, is more integral. It's a bigger commitment.
Cat people are weird. Let's just say it. I've got a cat. Cat people are weird. If you see someone like this into a store, they've got a cat. Have you got any cat stuff? No. Yeah, of course. Yeah. But cat people are different. They're wide different. That's why they've got a cat.
No, that's right. And usually they have a 50. Talking
about cat food, the state of cat food is appalling, in my opinion. It's a state and it's infuriating because when you explain it to people do get it. But as you say, rightfully so, it's mainly the grocery customer, and those foods are really, really low quality. But the state of cat food is ridiculous. Yeah. It's just ridiculous. It's appalling.
It is. It is, absolutely. And then you explain it to them and you say, well, this is how much it will cost to feed. And then they're like, oh, but it's like 3 times as much. They don't want to feed the
It's like 50
food.
quid a month or 30 quid a month or whatever. It's not, you go from 10 to 30. Don't have a cat if you don't want to feed him properly. That would be my
But
It's gonna
also,
cost you
what
more.
you were saying about the dogs are outside, the dogs are inside, the dogs are upstairs. The cats are pretty much still outside in a lot of people's houses, or they might just be coming in.
Yep.
So they haven't quite reached the sleeping on the bed stage. So maybe for some they have. And I think those people probably are doing it differently.
I think pedigree cats are different. And also, but pedigree cats are wired different as well. They tend to like treats more. I mean, if you take most outdoor cats, they're not that interested in treats generally because they're out murdering things continuously, to be honest. So
they're eating raw anyway.
Yeah. That's why they're fussy. They've just had a meal.
Exactly.
Exactly. They've just murdered something in your backyard.
And complete imbalance.
Brilliant.
But yeah, I think it is difficult, like trying to get the message across to cat people, to be fair, because it is, like I say, it's just a different market, and I think that it's at a different level of maturity as well.
That's what I mean. Yeah, definitely is. Yeah. Well, I like to think that education's the way forward. I love to give talks. I love to meet people. I love to do things like this. So I'm just going to keep doing it, and really try to support people to understand it's much simpler than they think it is to give the dog everything they need.
The battle of information, isn't it? That's what I call it, because everyone's trying to put their message forward and bring new opinions or ideas or facts into the industry, but it's just a battle of information, and you have to dominate a lot of like the new media if you want to be relevant.
Yeah, and look, it's getting across clear messaging, I think. And like I say, look, I've always said this with dog food companies generally, is that their messaging on a lot of good brands is poor. I mean, like, it's funny because, like, I think you're saying about a dog food should have 60% meat, but that's not a great selling point for a shop.
Correct.
You know, because a normal person who comes in, they don't know how much meat should be in a bag of dog food.
Correct.
I think is it Ben Penrose said to me, he said, if you said that was about the same thing about chicken nuggets, there's like 60% meat, you'd be horrified by it. And you have to stop thinking that everybody is on the same page as you, because they're not. When they look at it and they go 60% meat, I don't know, is that good, bad? I don't know. Mm-hmm. You know, you need to like really get your messages out on what the benefits are. And this is why raw has a problem, because in my opinion, because its messaging is poor.
And then these other brands, the target market are people that are raw feeding.
Yeah.
That's why they're talking about the high meat content, because they would like people that are raw feeding to go, oh, well, actually, do I really need to feed fresh food? Maybe I should just feed this 60% meat cold pressed instead. So that's their target market, which from your point of view, talking about business models, well, that's a very small margin of people that are feeding their dogs. They'd be better off marketing, as you're saying, to other guardians that want to maybe just come away from grocery store shopping.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I actually say to people all the time, like when it comes to cold press products and when it comes to things like freeze dried, I mean, although I think freeze dried is crazy expensive.
Well, it is, because the processing is crazy expensive. That's why. Yeah. But
I say you shouldn't be going after raw food customers. Like, I mean, you can maybe position yourself as a friend to raw food. So if you want to keep a bag of something in the cupboard and you forgot to take the meat out, use this, but don't try and sell it as a better alternative. Yeah. The amount of people, the companies out there who are trying to sell kibbles or cold presses or
wild.
There's
wild.
So many
millions of pounds wasted on marketing by these companies is insane.
Yeah. You've got to position as a friend to raw, not you should always be like, look, we think raw is great. If let's say raw doesn't work for you, you haven't got the freezer space, blah blah blah, you could look at this product as an alternative, or maybe like we were saying before, add a little bit of raw in to this just to help, rather than you have to keep 20 kilos of raw meat in your freezer,
If it hasn't got the bone content in it, the bone matrix, it's not raw. And if it hasn't got the lipid and water hydration in it, it's not raw. It doesn't matter whether it's an alternative to, closest to, it is not raw if there's no bone matrix. The bone matrix is integral to why raw supports the body to be as healthy as it people report it to do.
Yeah, and that only comes when something isn't dried, right? So once you
can't cook. Well,
let's say you cook.
You could add a bone meal.
Yeah.
But companies aren't doing that. They do lightly cooked. They're not adding bone meal.
But I'm talking about, I know there's a cold press company that does like an 80-10-10 cold pressed.
Are they adding bone meal?
They're adding 10%
Possibly.
bone, 10% bone, 10% organ.
I need to know more, and I need to find out how and why and what's going on there. Because once you start to change bone, once you heat things, once you dry them, they change. So, the raw bone matrix is always going to be the optimal in terms of the bioavailability of the nutrients. So, maybe that will turn out to be, this food that you know about will turn out to be the closest thing to raw. I don't know.
Well, I think that's how they're positioning it, is like...
But again, come back to this business, like that's such a small part of the market. I think when I first started in raw, it was about 3% of the overall UK market. Now they reckon it's about 15%. That's so small. But
it's until recently, until Nutriment obviously bought everyone, it was probably the least corporate part of the whole market. And look, one of the main reasons I was big on natural treats is because you can't just pick up the phone and say, give me a lorry load of deer legs, because it's just, it's not possible. A bit like Ben at Mersey Raw, for example. The meats he uses, you can't just pick up the phone and say, give me 20 tons of goat meat, like frozen goat meat. It's not realistic. There's like natural limitations on a lot of this stuff, which is great for independent people, but like it makes it hard for corporates to get involved in that side of the market.
Yeah. So there'll always be smaller businesses.
Yeah, but until recently, like the raw food market was pretty much the independent.
Yeah.
Very fragmented.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas obviously.
Yeah. Well, we've had the problems that you've noticed with the labelling, because there's been different amounts of knowledge within that. When they're actually designing graphically what they're going to write on the packet, they don't know exactly what they should be putting on, and that's why people end up working with people like me, because they're like, oh, trading standards are at the door. What should it say?
But it's me tooing, isn't it? There's like there's been some raw companies which me too, and like it's the same with supplements, because obviously you got to know me through Lara, but the reason I got Lara on and not, let's say, some of the other supplement companies is because she truly knows and understands what she's talking about, whereas I have spoken to at least one other company who were nice enough but didn't have a clue why they were selling what they were selling. They were just kind of me tooing. They created a brand for Amazon or something like that, and people are on there going, oh, pumpkin powder, I could do with some pumpkin powder. But they're not really, they don't get the whole thing. They don't get what makes it good, what makes it, or like I think you were saying, like people selling dried goat's milk powder and claiming it was probiotic, when, it's all been absolutely, all the probiotics have been, it's not probiotic at all.
Exactly.
I mean, goat's milk is probiotic, but not dried goat's milk, So it's understanding that. And, that's why you need people who are doing it, because they understand it rather than just me tooing. And the problem is, once everything gets big, everyone me toos.
Yeah, of course. You're always going to get that in all industries, I think. But I just come back to education. That's why I love it so much. That's why I do the events, so that people can come and actually talk to people and network with other guardians who have already been on the same journey. They've been on my dog wouldn't eat raw, and then I did this, and then he did. They've been on those journeys. They've been on my dog got constipation on raw, and then I changed this and he got better. Like, okay, it's very general, but you can meet people, you can talk to people at these events, and you can learn from speakers. You can learn when you do these events and these talks and these courses. It's got to be the only way. People, like you were saying, they want to be informed. So I think it's up to us to provide the opportunity for them to be informed, really.
I did actually play with the idea, and obviously this is just an idea I was having. It's not something I'm doing, but of doing a pet industry education day, in terms of trying to get pet stores together in one place, a bit like a Pat's, make it a very low cost event, like also do a recording, but just actually trying to get information out into stores so they can get it out and proliferate it out, because there's no centralized mechanism currently working for that, to actually do it in a very low cost way for people because we need it in the industry.
There's no independent.
No, because we need it to fight against the corporates. We need to fight against...
Shop from your independent pet shop, yeah?
But we need it to fight against grocery. Because look, if we allow ourselves to become grocery and we play the rules of grocery, we're going to lose. Because they'll always be able to do it cheaper. They'll always be more convenient than we are. And so we need to be more educated. We need to be better at what we do. Because we care more.
Need to offer the personal service that you just can't get in grocery.
Yeah, but it's not just because personal service is one of those things where it's like, I like you. You're a lovely guy. It's more than that. It's about trust. It's about when we tell them something, if we can help with it, we tell them openly and honestly, this could be right for you. Wouldn't do that. Or if you've got a real problem, go to the vet. Being really open and honest about
real
stuff.
People.
Yeah, real people who actually care and who aren't driven by the financial aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring it on.
Be different. It's more fun.
Yeah. But
and we get to meet more dogs, which is always good.
But look, the money always comes. Like, I never got into wholesaling because I wanted to be like, I thought this was going to make me a lot of money. I got into it just because I loved the pet industry. I loved selling stuff. I liked seeing I had a buzz when I saw someone walking out of a shop with one of my products. That's what it was always about. It wasn't about, if I can sell more of these, I can get an extra amount more money. Rubbing my knees, just thinking, do you know what I mean?
That's what I do.
Well, I did a little bit sometimes, but but do you know what I mean? And that's what makes the industry great, is because you actually have people who could potentially make more money doing something else, but they're passionate about what they do, and we need to keep that and try and support that as much as we can. Yeah, absolutely. So any other thoughts about the pet food industry or canine nutrition that you're like, I wonder if Caroline knows the answer?
Not really. I think it's still very, very fragmented. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not all opinions should be taken the same, should be given the same importance. And I just think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a battle of information. And the one who knows how to distribute information is going to win. Authentically, I think. Because people 100%. Are looking for authentic. 100%, yeah. Yeah, but it's got to be authentic, but also not confusing. It's got to get to people. Yeah, you're right. It's like, so it becomes quite hard even for the person delivering the information. Yeah. But this is the trouble. Once you start going into bone matrices and it becomes incredibly. Like, people are like, well, has this got a bone matrix? I don't even know what's going on anymore. Like if I did I take the matrix? Did I take the red pill? Yeah, I think I guess you're adapting it for your audience. I mean, I'm just naturally thinking your audience will automatically know what a bone matrix is. They may not. No, but some do, some don't. And look, at the end of the day, it's just, I think also it's just about trying to simplify things down. Because I think we've got to the point where everything just seems so complex that, and there's so much conflicting information, and there's so much information that like people are genuinely just confused at this point about this sort of stuff. It's not, I think if we could, find a way just to make things a lot more simple. I think it's got to come down to empowerment of your own truth. And that is happening across the board in lots of different sectors. Culturally, it's happening where we've kind of lost our empowerment to someone else to do it for us. And we're regaining that now. And that's what we need. So, because then it's like I was saying about most people agreed with Jamie in that scenario, because actually deep down, our truth is that we know that fresh food serves us better, whole foods serve us better than the foods we're eating. Yeah. So it's like we do have this integral truth of what humanity needs to survive, but we get disempowered along the way. And hopefully,
I can support people in what I do. I like to think that's what I'm supporting them to do. So it's never about telling, I hope. It's about sharing information, and they will hopefully go away and make their own decisions and become empowered.
It's also doing it in a way that doesn't guilt people as well.
Of course, yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of shaming goes on as well. Like, so there's one person I can think of who's a raw food advocate, and they have this whole very aggressive anti-kibble stance. And I think it shames people into like thinking, am I this horrendous person? Like we don't want people to think anybody's a horrendous person.
You just have a job or kids.
Yeah.
You're busy.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just don't want to
didn't
handle
know.
raw meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Big
you just
deal.
didn't know.
And if you aren't in the position to feed raw meat, you're also still not a bad person. There's things you can do with kibble. There's things you can do.
Things you can add to it.
Yeah.
It's a free country.
Yeah, no, but it's true. But just because you feed kibble, it doesn't make you a bad person. You know,
Well, I think historically that has happened, hasn't it? They have felt like that. You know, and I would say that a lot of the people coming forward now that are presenting information are not necessarily doing it in that way anymore, but it has historically been a bit like that. It's been a very versus argument, hasn't it?
Well, this is why, like I say, the word ideological a lot with raw feed people is because it's about an "I'm better than you" situation with some of them.
It
shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, but you know, you can't tell me it's not. Or, do you know what I mean? Because it's sort of like, what do you mean you feed that? This is the It's like, do you know what? Like, there's somebody who believes they're doing the best thing for their animal. They love their animal, dislike their family member, and you're there telling them, do you know what I mean?
Well,
and
those people haven't asked you for your opinion, have they? I mean, it's different. They come in your pet store, they're asking you, how can my dog
it's a
be
real
healthier?
turn off to people when you actually guilt them, or if they're not in that position, or they can't afford to. Because, you know, like, there's things you can do. You can say, look, give way. You can only afford WAG. That's fine. But let's give you some kelp powder, or let's give you some
bone broth.
Like whatever it is you can afford, just to make it that little bit better, and like make your dog a bit healthier. You don't have to go nuts, you know. You don't have to subscribe to the most expensive, you know, whatever it is, just to feed your dog, you know, in the optimum way, because we don't feed ourselves in the optimum way. We feed ourselves to what we can afford, you know.
I mean, the same goes on, I think, for the way we eat ourselves. This is happening as well. And it's knowing what to spend money on as well, because I have had conversations with clients that they have been feeding a certain food, and when you actually look at what they're supplementing it with, it's like, actually, if you didn't spend money on that, you probably could afford a better food. So it's working out what we could spend our money on and where we're actually putting our money, and is that done in the most optimal way? Yeah.
No, definitely.
Which takes a different kind of person as well, because then you're sort of teaching people more about economy than you are actually how to feed the dog.
But look, we live in everyone's got different priorities. Everyone's got a different situation, and like, it's just about balancing convenience with ability, with economics, with you know, what the best is for within those confines. And that's why independent shops who are well educated, who understand their products, understand not just the foods but their supplements, their entire ecosystem is so important. And that's why we need to. You know, we need more Sams in this world, because,
more
you know.
pet shops like
on that note.
Right, like, Sam's got to get to the train station, and been awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.